And then all of a sudden, over time, the work gets better and it starts reaching people and connecting with them. And they determine whether it's great or not. But the makers, they just have to keep shipping. They have to keep shipping.
This is Habit Hackers Rebel Radio, Episode 8. This is a very special episode of Habit Hackers Rebel Radio. This episode is part 2 of our 2-part interview with Paul, the New York writer and photographer. In episode 7, we really delved into the habits it takes to be a successful writer. In this episode, we focus on his photography. Now, what's amazing and what's interesting and what makes sense to anyone who really believes in habits is Paul was able to take the habits that he had when it came to becoming a better and better writer and apply those to photography. By applying these habits of discipline, moving things forward, shipping, and getting stuff done, he was able to develop a skill over a much shorter period of time than it took with writing. If you haven't listened to episode 7, go back and listen to that. But episode 8, you'll hear a lot of the same great habits applied to something completely different. It's inspiring to see and definitely worth a listen.
Your craft, I believe, influences what you see. So if you're an architect, you walk around a city like New York and you pay attention to the buildings and where they're made. It's a brilliant book. It's called On Walking. By Alexandra Horowitz. She walks around her block with 11 different experts, a sign maker, a painter, a writer. And she noticed that as she walked around this block that she's been living for, a very long time, every single person had a different perspective. Every single person encouraged her to stop and see something differently. Made me appreciate these subtle details of, light, and contrast and shadows and tones in ways that I would have never, cared about. When I'm walking around now, I'm a terrible walking partner now. I have to stop and be like, do you see this? Do you look at this light? Look at the way the light is hitting this building. It's beautiful. And obviously to a person who doesn't, do photography, they don't really understand that. It's harder for them to appreciate what I'm telling them. Maybe they do and they try, right? But because I was, taking so many photos every week whenever I could, I was just training my eye to see things that I would just miss every single day. Little expressions on the subway, people smiling, little gestures, the way people stand, in a subway, everyone's facing this way and there's this one person facing that way. Why? Right? And so I think it's made me pay attention. And for us, if you're doing something and it activates a flow state very quickly, you should start really investing in that thing because there's something there that you need to figure out. There's something about that activity that is making you just happy. Like it is pleasurable. It is challenging. It feels good. It could be anything, whether it's sports, whether it's running, whether it's meditating or photography. If you feel that in your body, investigate it. Ask why you are so connected to this. And I think that's what drew me into photography is that, I'm walking around taking photos of, buildings and the way a fence is casting a shadow on the sidewalk. And all of a sudden I look at the time and like 5 hours went by. I haven't eaten anything, maybe even forgot to drink water. And to me, I come home saying, you know what, if I felt this way, and I truly felt this way, I need to keep fulfilling this. I need to keep feeding it. What does it mean, right? Why is my brain, kind of activating like this when I'm doing this? And if you can make a career and get paid out of doing that, then, oh man, like that, I think that to me is the epitome of like a meaningful, rich, creative life.
You've only been doing that a year, 2 years?
Yeah, about a little over a year now, maybe like a year and 2 months. And so it started when I moved to Brooklyn. My brother gave me his camera. And I totally agreed with him. I was hiding. I was, in my room on weekends, like, not exploring, not going into different parts of the city and just like by myself. And I think there was a lot of things that I had to face. The fact of being lonely, right? Because my whole life I'm used to, finishing work and going to my best friend's house. My same friends that I have now, I've had since I was like in third grade. And so these lifelong friendships, to not have them around was a little bit like different for me. And so the habit was, on weekends, wake up, go to the gym, eat your breakfast, shower, and get ready for the day, grab the camera and just go and just get out. The habit was completed when I got on a train and I headed towards a destination that I've never been to. Come out of the subway station and I look around and I'm just like, I've never been in this neighborhood, and I make it to the end of the block. Every time I did that, I never turned around and went back home. It actually forced me to just explore and explore. And so I would, come home with sometimes 500 to 1,000 photos, and I'm uploading them onto, Lightroom, and I'm going through all of them and I'm deleting like 95% of them. And, I would this is also when I started teaching myself Lightroom and Photoshop. I would, come home, I would have these images. And over time, I, started developing a more tone and style for my photos. And now it's just simply, I don't even think about it. Like, for example, today, it's almost 3:30. I probably have like an hour and a half of sun left. Probably go after this. I'll probably go out, walk a few blocks, take a few shots. It's second nature now. I can't even, I don't have to force myself to do things. It just, boom, it happens. Like, oh, this is the time of day, or this is the cue. You're bored. Go out and take photos.
Talking about people we admire, it is those people that go all in on themselves, whatever it's like. What people connect with, I think, is they're just 100% themselves, 100% life. That's what they're seeing when they're seeing you light up, when the smiles are there. They're seeing the reflection of you being just completely in line with what you believe you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. And, when you meet people who produce so much work online or wherever, and you can almost feel like you know them, right? And then you meet them in person and they are exactly that. I think that's so inspiring, man. The fact that there is no disconnect between what I kind of consumed online about you and who you are, in this room with me talking about the things you love. When there's no disconnect from that, I think that is just authenticity. I think Milton Glaser was the one who said, really like beautiful work is when you are completely authentic with yourself and you're expressing it wholeheartedly. And that's a challenge, right? That takes years and a lifelong process. There's no kind of finite thing where it's like, okay, I've mastered it. I don't have to think about it anymore. The people, these masters of the craft, I mean, it's a lifelong thing. They can't imagine doing anything else.
I don't think everybody appreciates is it takes time to become yourself. You believe now you're in that place. Photography might be that arena for you.
Mm-hmm.
But the first time you picked up a camera and started taking photos and your brother asked you to do that, you probably didn't feel like you feel now.
Nope. Not even a thought.
But it's the same process. It's still standing there with a camera. So it's not the activity, it's the practice of the activity and the habit of the activity and the connection to it. And going,
absolutely,
this is more of me. This is more of me.
Yep. One of my favorite, I actually see the book right now. It's from Letters of Note. It's a series of letters from, all different types of backgrounds, writers, creatives, politicians, etc. One of my favorite ones is by Kurt Vonnegut. A group of high schoolers was tasked to write to their favorite authors, and this was an assignment that the teacher gave every year. And that year, many of the students wrote to Kurt Vonnegut, and he was the only author that had ever responded to this homework assignment. And he said, practice any art, photography, dance, sculpture, poetry, not for fame or money, but to experience becoming. Every time I'm in doubt, every time I question if what I'm doing is actually worth it, I read that quote over again. And I realize that, the practice of the process is ultimately about becoming, who you want to become. And that changes, right? If you were to ask me, a year or two ago, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I would have said some famous job title at some famous company, because I thought that was what my trajectory was. But all of a sudden, this camera ends up in my hands, and a year goes by, and my dreams and narrative are fundamentally different. I mean, it's still rooted in creativity and making, and storytelling, but the medium is different. But the practice is very much the same: showing up every day, shipping stuff that's imperfect, refining your craft, having humility, learning, asking for help. That's, I think, the biggest one for me is something that I struggle doing.
Why did you struggle to ask for help?
I think at first it was a cultural thing, growing up with Korean parents and having that kind of upbringing was always about just like, stop complaining, put your head down and get to work. And I also obviously learned that watching my parents. I never heard my father complain a day in his life. I think that attitude carried with me throughout like my early, when I was, much, much younger. It showed that I was determined. It showed that I had grit. As you get older and you start collaborating with more people, the work is not, it kind of has a wider maybe purpose. You have to learn how to just simply ask for help. And I think the simplest way of me asking for help is saying, hey, I'm 80% done with this project. Can you tear it apart for me? Show me what I'm not understanding. Show me what doesn't make sense to you, so that I can make this better. And it's also through like having good bosses or colleagues, right? That they can see that in you and encourage you to be like, hey, these are like your incredible strong suits, but like, man, like you should have asked for help. Like all it took was an email or a DM on Slack, and I would have been there for you. I failed at that many, 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 many times until it really started kicking in, until it became a habit.
Have you heard the Humans of New York story?
Yes.
I forget the guy's name. What's the guy's name?
Brandon Stanton.
Yeah. The story as I know it is he worked in, I think, finance or some job completely unrelated.
Yeah.
But he lost his job, and he said to himself, he had a pity party one day, and then the following day said, I want to be a photographer. Why don't I just act like a photographer for the next 3 months? And I'll see where I'm at. If I don't have any money or any prospects, I'll go get another job in finance. I'll be fine. Just went out every single day and just took photos of interesting things for 3 months straight, 90 days. And by the end of the 90 days, I think he had a couple of hundred stories, and that became Humans of New York.
Yep. I mean, and look at his work now, right? It's so simple now, because now that I understand photography, when I look at his work, yes, they're great photos because there's a connection. Technically or even like compositionally, it's not the most masterful thing, but it doesn't have to be. The fact that you see this image and you read this caption and it cultivates empathy and compassion, and it makes you think about maybe your privilege or your comfort or kind of your life, and how it, in contrast to this person who's very vulnerable and oftentimes in pain. Man, like I envy his work. I wish, I had started something like that. It's an incredible body of work. It shows the power of habit, of going out there and shooting a bunch of photos. If you look at people like him and, people like Seth, go to their archives from like the first 1 or 2 or 3 years. No one was paying attention. No one was liking that, retweeting it, sharing it on Facebook. It was completely invisible. And then all of a sudden, over time, the work gets better and it starts reaching people and connecting with them. And they determine whether it's great or not. But the makers, they just have to keep shipping. They have to keep shipping. Maybe he's not the greatest technical photographer, nor does he have to be, but he is a masterful storyteller. I mean, for someone to be able to approach strangers in New York City and pull these stories out of them, and for them to be like, I trust you with my story, knowing that it's going to go, millions of people will see it and read it. That's the skill, not sitting there and taking a photo. The skill is connecting with people. And that took him, many, many years and many, many stories to hone.
If you like this podcast, what would really help us out is if you give it a review. Nothing helps shareability and more people seeing it like a review. Appreciate those that have already given one, and keep it up. Thank you so much and keep listening.
Radio.